Well, we're not too far now from the big day itself, and I think it's time we kicked it up a gear on this whole Christmas cheer business. So, this week we're going to be breaking the emergency glass on a sickly sweet, surreal little Christmas movie from 1964 that I'm certain that most of my regulars will be intimately familiar with. Yeah, we're doing Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. A film that most people have probably predominantly seen riffed by either MST3K or riff tracks. But I kinda took the long way around on this one. See, I've had multiple copies of Santa Claus Conquers the Martians over the years. I've owned it standalone, I've owned it as part of a few hundred film public domain movie packs, and I have fully intended to actually sit and watch this movie on multiple occasions. And yet, despite setting up, getting cozy and clearing my schedules, I've never made it all the way to the end before. There's always just something that inevitably pops up and gets in the way. I mean, it's Christmas, probably the most likely time unexpected shit is going to come flying in on a moment's notice, and whether it was just acting as a driver for my folks to go and do some last minute Christmas shopping, being pulled away to wrap up presents, bake cookies, decorate trees, or run to the store for missing ingredients, one thing or another has generally meant that, until this year, I'd probably seen the whole thing in 10 to 20 minute dribs and drabs over a 10-year window exactly once. Well, no more, I say. And so I finally sat down and caught the thing from tail to snout, albeit for the fact I got pulled away for half an hour about 10 minutes off the end because Christmas Jesus really didn't want me to watch the whole thing in one sitting, seemingly. But I've at least watched the whole thing now, and, well, it's a trip and a half. Paul L. Jacobson is the man behind the madness on this one. He was a children's television producer with a dream to produce a festive science fiction movie, but not to spend too much. And so, in the early 60s, he teamed up with director Nicholas Webster, rented out a refitted soundstage that was formerly an aircraft hangar in Long Island, and the pair made the kind of bizarre Christmas napalm that could only come from someone who's overthought a basic idea into abstraction. So, up front, I should probably mention that the film's target audience was very, very young children. This was created to take advantage of the coveted matinee slot. As we discussed in my review of Carnival Magic, the matinee slot was seen by filmmakers as a bit of a cash cow. It was the age where parents would dump their kids off at the movies on the weekend, and it would essentially babysit them for 2 to 3 hours, long enough for mum and dad to get some housework done, or at the very least, enjoy a quiet house. Well, a Christmas matinee slot was essentially a ×2 multiplier on the potential profit generated, because in addition to the parents who are desperately looking for 2 to 3 hours free to do the housework, you now have those, and the parents who wouldn't normally take their kids to the theatre, who also need the time to do the Christmas shopping, wrapping and general festive prep, without little Timmy or Tamantha running around the basement torturing rats with a hacksaw and pulling the wings off of flies. As such, the safer and simpler you made the movie, the younger the kid who could watch it, and the more accessible to kids the movie is, the greater the chance that the parents would take them there. I'd say this film's tracking for kids aged between 3 and 7, with maybe a year's wobble either way. But, as such, the plot really isn't that complex. It just has a lot of moving parts. Oh, and to clarify, for the purpose of this review, I decided to grab Agfa's recent Blu-ray remaster of this movie, and there are 2 cuts of the film on the disc. A roadshow version that runs to 90 minutes and includes some extra scenes, an intermission, some adverts and promos to really help give it a timely feel, preserved from an original 16mm print, and a drive-in version preserved from an SVHS tape from Something Weird that's 60 minutes long and was aimed more at the double feature drive-in market. That version has none of the promo or intermission stuff, and it has some scenes shortened. To that end, I decided if I was going to check any one cut out, it'd be the longest cut for the fuller, cleaner picture. And as such, I'm going to be mainly talking about the roadshow version here. So the film opens with a live news report from KID TV. In a historic televisual first, they're using the Telstar satellite to broadcast, for the first time, a live interview from the North Pole between a KID news presenter and the Mr. Chris S. Kringle Claus himself, Santa. It's early December, and things are in full swing at the workshop, as the elves are busying themselves creating all the hot new toys that every kid could possibly want, with the hot ticket item this year being a new experimental toy rocket ship that flies using real rocket fuel, and a Martian action figure that looks all kinds of cool. Unfortunately, the interview's cut short when Mrs. Claus interrupts the interview to basically tell the presenters to sod off because Santa's got a lot of work to do, and that he gets easily distracted. But it's here that we get our first big plot twist of the movie, because watching this broadcast are two very small Martian children, who watch the interview with wonderment and confusion. They've never heard of such bizarre concepts as dolls or love, and they're captivated by this Santa Claus fellow that us Earthlings keep banging on about. So much so that they've stopped eating properly and need to be sleep sprayed into a coma if they're gonna sleep at all. This recent development bothers Martian leader Kimar, who along with his wife Lady Momar decides that they need to figure out what the meaning of these Earth broadcasts are and what effect they're having on their Martian children. Oh, and we're also introduced to Droppo. Droppo is the comic relief of this film. A goofy, manic, over-the-top so-and-so, and I don't know how he really fits into this world. He tends to hang around Kimar and Momar's place, but I don't think he's related to them. He isn't smart enough to be part of the Martian Council that Kimar commands, nor is he hired help from what I can see. Droppo is an oafish, clumsy git, and for some reason he might possibly just live in Kimar and Momar's house. For some reason. I don't know, he's weird and a bit annoying, and the more I think about it, the less I want to know why he's there. Anyway, Kimar calls the council, and after some discussion where it's revealed that this is a widespread problem, it's settled that they must travel to Thunder Forest and speak to their great elder Cho-Chum. The councillors are a bit insulted by this, thinking that they're being infantilized, but Kimar pushes on, and on arriving at Thunder Forest they're greeted by the elder, who informs them that the children of Mars are pining for an actual childhood. He explains that because of Martian technology, babies are born and immediately hooked up to a learning machine that develops their brains to adulthood within a couple of years, meaning that they're forced to be mature before their time, and seeing Santa and Christmas and the whole joy thing has kind of fundamentally broken something in their collective brains. His solution? He tells the council that in order to course correct, they need to allow their kids to actually be kids for a while. Let them enjoy their youth and give them a Martian equivalent of Santa and Christmas that they can also enjoy. With that, Cho-Chum vanishes and the council deliberates, and somewhere along the way, give the Martian children a Santa Claus equivalent of their own winds up being twisted into go to Earth and kidnap Santa and force him to make toys for Martian kids rather than Earthlings. Which is what the council agree to do. And with that, they hop in a spaceship. Droppo sneaks aboard as well because, of course he does. And they set a course for Earth. Initially, they arrive in New York. They do a scan of the area and find an immediate problem. There are hundreds of Santa Clauses, stood on almost every street corner, doorway and shopping mall. Confused by all of this, they decide to land to get their bearings. Unfortunately for them, the media couldn't help but notice a giant bloody spaceship hovering above the Empire State Building, and they've immediately started covering the UFO, with, rather hilariously, in a sign of the times way, the Soviets denying any involvement. While the fighter jets get scrambled to the scene, we're then introduced to Billy and Betty, just two all-American kids who, for some reason, are sleeping in a local park as a way of having fun. They chat back and forth idly for a bit, and then the Martians appear and briefly question the kids, who reveal that the real Santa is very likely going to be found in the North Pole at his workshop. The Martians thank the kids for their helpfulness before realising that they could very easily spoil the plans they have for kidnapping Santa, so they kidnap them as well and take them aboard the ship. It's not all doom and gloom though, as the kids take a shine to Droppo, who agrees to give the kids a tour of the spaceship as long as they keep it on the DL, as the council probably wouldn't appreciate him taking hostages on a guided tour. Oh, Droppo. Before you know it, they're at the North Pole, and while the Martians begin to plan their kidnapping, Billy and Betty decide this is their best chance to make a break for it and warn Santa of his upcoming danger. Which they do, but one small problem. They have no idea where Santa's workshop is, and it's like -50 Celsius out there and they're wearing knitwear. It doesn't take long till they're sheltering in a polar bear's dwelling, and when the Martians realise they're gone, they summon the almighty Torg, a killer cardboard robot to capture them and take them back to the ship. The Martians and Torg search the icy terrain and eventually locate the kids. One of the Martians, Voldar, who's dead against this whole operation and thinks the Martian kids should just fall in line, urges Torg to kill the kids, but Kimar interrupts, instead informing Torg to return to the ship. With that, the Martians locate Santa's workshop. Torg smashes open the door, the Martians freeze Santa's elves in place and inform the big red guy himself that he's to come quietly to avoid any trouble. However, due to the magic of the workshop, Torg reverts back to being just a giant toy robot and basically stops working. So the Martians have to awkwardly take Santa back to the ship by themselves, which he willingly agrees to while also being a jolly so-and-so the entire time. On leaving Earth, we then crossfade and some time has passed. Droppo, Santa and the kids are becoming really good friends, and Santa's making sure to spread the merriment. So much so that his joy appears to be infectious, opening the councilmen up to making them more mirthy and light-hearted. Everyone except Voldar, who's still concerned about bringing Santa to Mars and absolutely has no time to be merry and bright. He's a Martian, for God's sake, not a comedian. And this merriment only continues to get on Voldar's nerves until he finally snaps and decides that Kimar has gone too far and that if he's going to restore order to Mars and its people, he's going to have to commit a mutiny of sorts. At first trying to kill Santa and the kids, before later relying on a much more devious tactic. Meanwhile, Santa and the kids arrive on Mars, and while at first Santa is jolly and compliant, hoping that he'll be able to give every kid on Mars a Christmas to remember before heading back to Earth to finish up his existing stack, Kimar makes it quite clear that Santa and the kids were on a one-way trip here and that they won't be going home at the end of this. This all leads to a third act of sabotage, espionage and the true meaning of Christmas, and Droppo. Will Santa manage to bring Christmas cheer to both Earth and Mars? Will Voldar finally achieve his dream of securing a position in upper middle management? And I swear to God, if Droppo ho-ho-hos one more time, I'm gonna... All this and more will be answered if you check out Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. And I feel like if you're meeting the film on its own terms, then it's pretty much achieved everything that it set out to do. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good experience all round. For starters, the script is simplistic to its own detriment. I appreciate that it was aiming at hooking a very young audience and was really a passion project that the filmmakers also just so happened would hope would print money for them, but there's simplistic and then there's basically the cinematic equivalent of pureed baby food. Almost none of the plot points get elaborated on any further than what's literally said or shown. The dialogue is dumbed down to the point where, by modern standards, it's pretty coherent, but by 60s language standards, I might as well be smacking a bucket with a bit of stick and screaming incoherently. And that dedication to keeping things as simple and straightforward as possible really impacts the overall pacing of the film, with the first act leaving the blocks on a pretty decent pace, ramping up into a second act that builds on the narrative elements introduced in the first act, but by the time the second act hits the halfway point, roughly around the time the kids are captured in the North Pole, it feels like the film begins to splutter a bit, leading to a second and third act that's just meandering, for lack of a better descriptive. It's almost like it runs out of steam after an intense 30 to 45 minutes of trying to be the jolliest, most colourful film it can be. At which point it just falls into weird runaround segments and extended time with Droppo, ultimately ending things in a very uninteresting and totally predictable way that doesn't really serve the world building it's tried to do in the opening hour and 20 minutes or so, and leaves a lot of questions open that probably flew over kids' heads but left me bewildered. To that end, the tone on this thing is sickly to the point of diabetes-inducing. If it wasn't for Voldar's character, this would be the cheeriest, most sugar-coated, barf-inducing, nicey-nice script that I have seen in a long time. There's almost no contrast to the ultra-colourful, vibrant jollity, which, in a way, you kind of want that in a Christmas movie, but the fact it's so unrelenting for the full runtime makes it beyond saccharine-inducing. I know a lot of folks who can't watch this one without the MST3K or Riff Tracks riff alongside it, and I can see why. Some snarky Midwesterners adding a bit of acidic comedy to the mix gives the sugary gumdrop nicey niceness a bit of something to play against, which probably tilts it back into the audience's favour. But on its own, I think you'd need to either be a child in the full swing of Christmas mania, or an adult on their third rum nog trying to capture a feeling long since lost. It's me, I'm the guy craving nostalgia. The characters come in two flavours, one note and flat, or irritating, with the majority of our Martians having a serious air to them and flat Mr. Spock style dialogue, largely talking through the visuals they're showing on screen. Our kids kind of fall into that category too, as upbeat and bright characters who again speak largely in simple sentences and don't really get much more to say or do other than state the bleeding obvious. On the other side of the scale we have Santa and Droppo. The former, well, you'd expect him to be jolly, a bit manic and whimsical, he's fucking Santa. And the latter is bad comic relief. Droppo brings with him the mania and jovial nature of Santa, but none of the likability or brand recognition. There's no reason for him to act the way he does, and the film's best answer is, well, he's Droppo, which isn't really an answer at all, especially if you consider that the film makes it clear Martians are programmed, not grown mentally. Droppo is bad comic relief to me, and the more time I had to spend with him, the more I wish he'd just sod it off. And of course, offering a bit of contrast to the two above character types, we have Voldar, who starts off as a kind of muted Mr. Spock type character and slowly, over the runtime, becomes a more and more impassioned character for just not fucking around and telling the Martian kids to shut up and get back to their not wanting Christmas shtick. Voldar is about as far as a contrast as you'll get for this movie, and it's a welcome tonal shift when he's on screen. But even Voldar isn't immune to the goody gumdrop sickly sweet nature of this movie, and even his meanness is kind of infused with a rainbow bright Care Bears level of I'm a grumpy little Gus attitude, softening him for the most part to a tolerable level, which is understandable but a shame. The script was written by Glenville Marith and Paul L. Jackson. They both only have one writing credit. I assume they were bought in on the cheap. This is the only thing they ever did, and Paul died in 2015. The film was directed by Nicholas Webster. He has 29 directing credits in a career spanning from 1961 to 1982. It seems he mainly worked in TV, with credits including Get Smart, Bonanza, and The Waltons. He sadly passed away in 2006 at the age of 94. On the direction front, it's actually not that bad. I mean, look, this is a cheap and cheerful production. It doesn't have the budget for sturdy sets and props. A lot of this film's set spaces are made out of painted cardboard and plastic, and a lot of the props are just actual kids' toys spray painted and repurposed. If you're coming into this film expecting a magical and authentic Christmas adventure, you're going to be a bit disappointed. But what Nicholas has managed to achieve with what he has is, in a way, nothing short of miraculous. The cheapness is inescapable, but he does what he can with the tools available. And working with the camera and lighting teams, he's managed to cultivate something that could have looked much, much worse. Given the vast majority of this film is set-based, there's at least a sense of depth to the spaces. They bothered to experiment with coloured lighting, and while the profiles are largely flat, the end result is a kind of woozy Christmas fug of a movie. A sugar cookie picture come to life. Probably bad for you, and considered junk by many, I found a tremendous comfort in how Nicholas had managed to make the threadbare budget stretch as far as it did. And some scenes, particularly the ones in Thunder Forest, I thought were incredibly well handled given the scale and scope. Cast direction, by contrast, is a bit flat. Droppo aside, who I don't think anyone could tell him how to play it the way he did, most of the cast spend time on screen glued to one spot unless distinctly told otherwise, and even then physical acting instructions are rudimentary and contain no more than 2 steps to them. They don't really emote big. Santa and Droppo are seemingly the only 2 characters given any kind of leeway on moving around the set spaces or improvising, and the dialogue deliveries are tepid at best for the most part, with the actor playing Voldar having the best stab at going a bit hammy, but ultimately feeling very pantomime tonally. As for the Cine, it's actually surprisingly good, and one I think a lot of people take for granted. I will say it isn't pushing any boundaries, nor does it have the budget for any kind of grand spectacular finale. But given the budget it did have to work with, I can't help but not be a bit impressed with this thing. Sequences are hung together well, framing is solid for the most part, they experiment with a good range of shot types, and while none of them are particularly breaking the style of shot types of the time, it's sturdy and then some, with actual track and dolly shots that are smooth and chosen well for certain scenes. Again, I'm not saying this is groundbreaking work, but given the scope and budget of this production, I was fully expecting it to be garbage. And I feel like they actually tried to work to the set space's favour more often than not, delivering something sturdy and considered with a pretty decent amount of B-roll, and something I find baffling, they do show a lot of the plot overtelling, but then, because this is a young kids film, they just tell anyway, which is kind of wild. The edits may be a tad rough around the edges, there's an over-reliance on stock footage for big chunks of the second act which did pull me out of the action a bit, and some shots cut just a little bit too early at times, narrowly avoiding cutting lines off. I mean, I've seen way worse than this, but it's definitely worth noting this is not the smoothest edit I've ever seen. Performance-wise, it's campy and hammy for the most part, but not in the traditional sense. John Call as Santa is pretty on the money for me. He looks the part, is incredibly jolly and merry, and ultimately is quite lovable in the role. He has good physicality to the piece, his deliveries are solid, apart from the fact that at times he strikes me as just a little too manic, bordering on uncomfortable territory. I think he does a pretty sound job, honestly. Vincent Beck as Voldar struggles with the material presented to him. It feels to me like he wanted to maybe go a little harder and meaner, but was being held back by the filmmakers who were worried about him being a little too nasty. I think he does the best within the confines of the role, but it's hard not to say that it feels a bit toothless in terms of being an actual threat here. Speaking more broadly, I mentioned that this film deals in camp both traditionally and non-traditionally. To elaborate, the non-traditional camp is predominantly on the Martians, whose flat and serious line deliveries contrast the frankly garish and luminous costume choices, while the performances are pretty on the money. It's hard not to stifle a titter at someone giving an impassioned monologue while dressed as the Great Gazoo. And, fun fact here, these Martians predate the Great Gazoo by a whole year. Stick it up your arse, Hanna-Barbera. The notable exception to that rule is Bill McCutcheon as Droppo, and as a quick caption summary, he's basically playing a circus clown in Martian makeup. For kids? Young kids? I think he'd probably be quite amusing and a fun hero figure. Someone the kids would want to cuddle up to, hear stories from and go on adventures with. Kind of a wacky uncle role, if you will. For adult viewers, it's deep hurting for the full runtime. Painfully unfunny jokes, bad physical comedy, and just abrasive loudness from start to finish. I was not a fan. Oh yeah, and this is Pia Zadora's first on-screen role, so good for her. And finally, the soundtrack. That is the beginning and end of the best of the score for this film. If you love it, then you'll enjoy the rest of the movie. If you didn't, well, buckle up, because it's that kind of tone for the rest of the movie, and I guarantee it will be an earworm to you from now until next Christmas. Santa Claus Conquers the Martians has a release history as long as my arm. That's because the film was initially released without proper copyright notices, meaning essentially anyone who wanted to put the film out who had an original film print could just churn it out and turn a profit. As a result, finding the first official home release is a little bit of a tricky one. I've dug as far as I can, and it looks like the film had its first release in 1986 on Good Time Video in the US and Channel 5 in the UK. Though, if you know of any earlier releases, do let me know. It then had several VHS releases through the mid-80s and early 90s. Something Weird was probably the most memorable and prominent release on tape. Things are equally vague on the DVD release history. I know for a fact it was a part of several multi-film packs in 2002, 3 and 4, as I own at least 2 sets it's featured on. Something Weird also released this on DVD-R, as did Delta Home Entertainment, but exactly which one did it first isn't entirely clear. Finally, in November of 2024, Agfa and Something Weird would pair up to give this film the release it really truly deserved, releasing Santa Claus Conquers the Martians and Other Holiday Hallucinations. The set contains 2 different cuts of the movie, one in cleaned up HD, which, despite it being sourced from a 16mm print, looks brilliant. It's rich, deep, basically the best the film's ever looked. And the other is sourced from an SVHS tape from Something Weird that enhances the fuzzy warm glow vibes that most folks will fondly remember this film for. Extras include 14 Christmas short films that are equally surreal, bizarre and downright weird, also courtesy of Something Weird, and an overview of the main production included as a lobby card written by Something Weird's own Lisa Petrucci. While the actual behind-the-scenes side of things is a bit lacking, it's an extras package trying to create a tone and atmosphere, and I think it absolutely succeeds in its goal. This is probably the best release this film is going to get, and the definitive way to watch a Martian try to kill Santa via airlock. Santa Claus Conquers the Martians isn't quite as fever dream inducing as Santa Claus vs. the Devil or The Christmas That Almost Wasn't, but it's still a pretty trippy time, all things considered. Achingly sweet and painfully sincere in what it wants to do, I can't deny that while I did tire of this film by the end, I was on board way longer than I thought I would be. My recommendation? Grab the AGFA release and watch it with the Riff Tracks audio commentary over the top of it. I think that's probably the best way forward with it. Either that or get some friends around, order some pizza-infused eggnog and strap in for probably the most aggressive riff session of your life. It's just kind of impossible not to take the piss out of this one if you're over the age of 9.